Well, welcome to another episode of the Happy Hour podcast. Ricky is out and about this week, but he will be back. We are going to be diving into free agency on Wednesday, so look for a special earlier episode next week. There will probably be 2 episodes as we will continue our Dynasty Countdown, which is what we are going to do today. We are going to look at a wild and crazy NFL news week. And then we are going to continue our Dynasty Top 10 consensus rankings going to running backs. Today, I am joined by Jason. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. Excited to be on. I'm sorry. Again, I miss Ricky for what seems like the 4th or 5th time. But, I'm hopeful we'll get there. Somebody's got to fill in these awfully big shoes and just one toe at a time for me. Thanks for having me on again, Matt.
Well, I dropped him a link, so you never know when he might pop up, just to startle us all. Probably, I'm sure there's some running back in there that he's really hyped about, or maybe to tell us how great Ryan Tannehill is as a quarterback, that we missed that from last week.
Never tire of it.
Never tire. Well, before we dive into our consensus running back rankings, there was just a few little news items this week for the NFL, getting a jump start on the official start of the league year, which is Wednesday, the 16th. The legal tampering period begins Monday, the 14th, so we can expect a lot of deals to start getting announced. But some teams just couldn't wait, and they pulled the trigger on a number of trades. We had blockbuster trades on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Who knows what we're going to have by the time today is over. But the first of those was on Tuesday, a couple big shots of news. First, Aaron Rodgers, who had been rumored to be on the move, agreed to a 4-year deal to stay with the Packers. Some reported it was $200 million, around $50 million a year. Aaron Rodgers went on social media to say figures aren't correct, but he's definitely going back. But then the big one was the Denver Broncos didn't get Aaron Rodgers, but they did pull off a blockbuster trade to get Russell Wilson from the Seattle Seahawks. They sent Drew Lock, Shelby Harris, Noah Fant, 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, a 5th-round pick, and got Russell Wilson and a 4th-round pick back. Jason, you and I were the only 2 that had Russell Wilson in our top 10 when it came to consensus ranks. I assume he's still there for you?
Yeah, clearly some clairvoyance on our part for seeing that. I mean, with quarterback, the skill alone is going to dictate a lot of their value regardless of situation. And clearly their prime assets in Seattle for Russell Wilson when he was there with DK Metcalf and Anthony Lockett. Moving to Denver, it's, trading one for the other, and maybe the coaching scheme is more fruitful in Russell's volume, if that helps. But
yeah, I still had him around QB. I had him at QB8. I wouldn't bump him up higher, but I don't think it diminishes his value. For me, from a fantasy perspective, I bumped Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, Tim Patrick, bumped up Albert O quite a bit because he seems I thought he was developing into a good receiver last year. The fact that they traded Fant and kind of left him as the guy at that position gives me a good deal of confidence. I doubt they're going to go make a splashy signing there, so he could have a bigger role. On the flip side, it'll be interesting to see if Tyler Lockett ends up getting dealt. We've seen rumors about him going to New England, Chicago, a whole bunch of places. I wouldn't be surprised. Seattle also released Bobby Wagner if they're not done making moves. But I think you definitely have to drop him and DK Metcalf. I dropped Noah Fant in my rankings. Metcalf is going to be the most interesting. He has an incredible skill set. But right now, the only quarterbacks on the Seahawks roster are Drew Lock and Jacob Eason. It's possible they use that new shiny number 9 pick on a quarterback. It's possible they trade for some. There have been rumors they might try to trade for Deshaun Watson. He has a big step in the legal process today, so I'll be curious to see if that hypes up rumors or quells them. But for fantasy, what did it do for you for the assets in Denver and Seattle?
You make an excellent point on Albert O. The the signaling with Noah Fant leaving, I think is a very big confidence. It doesn't move him into the top 10 at tight end for me, but he's definitely becomes more of a worthwhile consideration. Maybe somebody might be sleeping on him in your leagues, and you sneak him in as a piece in a deal. But for Sutton and Judy, I think they go from somebody maybe you're looking to I guess cut shares of to now you're looking to hold, I suppose. They figured to gain value, if anything, during this season, and maybe even prior to the season. We could get some interesting opportunities. Maybe you leverage the DK Metcalf, downward trend and try and do a modest deal of adding one of these receivers and a pick to upgrade to a more talented player and hope that gamble works out.
Yeah, I think the biggest flux for me is probably Tyler Lockett, because if he stays in Seattle, I'd probably putting him in the wide receiver 4 or 5 range, because he was only a low-end wide receiver 3 for me as it was, because I think Metcalf is kind of the bigger talent. Lockett's more of the volume PPR kind of guy. I don't know. Let's say they roll the dice and take a Malik Willis, who people think is a development project, and they have Drew Lock. I bet those guys kind of split starts during the season, and it may not be. As somebody who's seen Lock play for 3 years, he has his moments, but they aren't always great moments. And Seattle doesn't have an incredible infrastructure. They seem like they're pushing their chips in kind of fully on a rebuild, which will be interesting to see.
I would think this means they let Penny walk.
Yeah,
they lose interest because if they're committing to the rebuild, there's no sense spending money at the position.
Yeah, and they still have Carson. Carson had signed a 2-year deal last year, so he would still come back on 1 year. Seattle has seemed to find magic just pulling guys, off the scrap heap of life and throwing them out there. They could also use some of those draft picks.
Yeah.
So the other piece I touched on, Aaron Rodgers, we now know he is staying in Green Bay. They also tagged Davante Adams. So Adams should be staying. Aaron Jones had signed a long-term contract. Aaron Rodgers was QB 11 for me, just outside my top 10. I really wouldn't move him in there higher. I think that's still a good spot. But what did that signing do for you, Jason?
The only thing it could really do was bump. I had Deshaun Watson at 10. Maybe I put Aaron Rodgers in the 10 spot over him just because of the certainty.
Yeah, and I mean, he's thrived there. I think the question with Rodgers is, we're not quite as hardcore as John is about once you're over 30, I won't consider you. But, he is 38. It's nice he has a 4-year deal. I'm still not convinced that he's happy for 4 years in Green Bay. I'm still not convinced he plays for 4 years. But, you could see it. And, if you take that bet, it's not terrible. He still has great value for this year. But it's almost, to me, he's entered that kind of Tom Brady the last few years stage where if you have him and you're a contending team, he could be a piece to get you in there. But if you're a rebuild or you're a middling team, I just don't see the long-term value in Dynasty. You'd be better off trying to get younger at the position.
I think that's an excellent perspective on it. It's really dependent on your team situation. And if you're starting up a team, that first round probably makes all the difference on what you're doing with Aaron Rodgers in the early second, maybe, or later in the second round.
So the Washington Commanders have been goal one to get a new quarterback. Supposedly they made a big offer to Russell Wilson, who had a no trade clause and declined. Apparently Philadelphia also offered, and he declined them. The Commanders spurned, not able to get Rodgers, not able to get Wilson, turned to, I guess, plan B and make a blockbuster trade on Wednesday to get Carson Wentz. Second offseason in a row he's been traded. Going to be on his third team in 2 years. He costs a first-round draft pick this year for the Colts, much less expensive for the Commanders. Basically, the Colts and the Commanders swap second-round picks, so the Colts move up 5 spots there. The Commanders sent a third-round pick, and they have a conditional third for 2023 that could become a second. So we'll talk about Washington first. Washington still has Taylor Heineke, who started a lot of last year. Wentz now in the mix. They still have the number 11 pick. Do they go quarterback again, or do you think they believe that Wentz could be their guy?
I think Wentz is their guy, but I don't think it's a long leash. I think realistically it shouldn't stop them from taking a quarterback if there's somebody they like on the board. The amount of importance on the position, just judging from the value these quarterbacks get in these monster trades, shows you how much the gamble is worth it when it pays off, when you're hitting on a quarterback in any of these drafts. And this draft in particular, it looks like you could be taking the first quarterback off the board by the time they're picking there. So I don't see any reason to stray from that position just because you have Carson Wentz, who's basically been, I guess, abandoned in his first 2 stops in the NFL. So.
Yeah, I don't think just having Carson Wentz would keep you from doing it, but knowing Ron Rivera and their team, I'm wondering if Washington looked at the landscape of potential rookie quarterbacks this year and thought, let's roll the dice for 1 year on a veteran like Wentz and try to rebuild the rest of our team. Because Washington, let's be honest, the quarterback was far from the only reason they struggled last year. Their defense needs a few pieces. Their offensive line could use some pieces. Excuse me. The air in here. But for me, from a fantasy perspective, it's fantasy neutral for Terry McLaurin and Antonio Gibson for me. But how do you feel about those guys?
I think that was well put. I've not been very high on Carson Wentz. And just realistically, I like Terry McLaurin, but he's a lot older than his fantasy experience or NFL tenure would let you believe. I don't mind Antonio Gibson. In the contrary, I think we have some evidence, at least, of Jonathan Taylor being phenomenal last year with Carson Wentz and his limitations at quarterback, maybe being a good opportunity for the running game in Washington to continue to thrive. But for the most part, it doesn't change how the fantasy assets are going to be valued, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see. Washington obviously spent a lot of money last offseason to get Curtis Samuel, and injuries pretty much kept us from ever seeing what impact, if any, he would have had on the field. Logan Thomas got injured last year. If those guys come back, Wentz could have a few weapons. Maybe that's even more impetus to spend your draft picks on helping the offensive or line or pieces on defense. For the Colts, now kind of an interesting situation. They'll have a new starter for the third time in 3 years as well. They had Phillip Rivers in 2020. They rolled the dice on Wentz and missed the playoffs in 2021. Currently, they only have Sam Ehlinger and James Morgan on the roster. They also have no first-round pick. People have said maybe the Colts will try to agitate and move their way up into the first round. They have $69 million in cap space, so there has been a lot of rumors that they are targeting Jimmy G in a trade. What would you think if Jimmy G ended up in Indianapolis? Upgrade over Wentz?
It just feels like the more the Colts change, the more they stay the same, if that were the case.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. Jimmy G's a fine veteran quarterback. I don't know if I'd consider him an upgrade. If they do that move, I still think they use a early second round pick to get whichever of the quarterbacks drops into the second round to have something for the future. You know, I don't totally understand unless there's a secret big trade coming. This move for Indianapolis, because they're good enough that they shouldn't be doing a complete rebuild, but leaving yourself with no quarterback, unless Jonathan Taylor, who I personally love, is gonna throw the ball as well. They have some problems, but for me, Jonathan Taylor still the top running back for me. I still like Michael Pittman, so I'm kind of fantasy neutral on this move for them too. But does it do anything with your thoughts on those players?
Very much keeps their value basically intact. I don't see any harm. I don't see any improvement. It's actually brings up a question that I might pose to you: is what do you value in an NFL quarterback in regards to trying to win a Super Bowl? What's going to make a difference for you? What is your importance at the position?
Yeah, and I think we've seen teams. Maybe that's part of the appeal of a Jimmy G is you think your team is good enough on offense and defense. You just need somebody who's going to manage the game, not kill you, and help you get there. Because we saw that with San Francisco. They had good enough pieces around them. It didn't matter. I don't know if the Colts are quite there yet. Outside of Pittman, they have more questions than answers in their receiving core. Jack Doyle just retired, so I don't know what they've got at tight end. They have Nyheim Hines and they have Jonathan Taylor. But I think a curious thing that hasn't been talked about as much is we've seen that offensive line ebb down a little bit the last couple of years. They've lost some pieces. It looks like they're on track with that again. So they actually, what used to be like a rock solid strength for their team is something that they're going to have to move back to. I guess if I was a Colts fan, I don't understand exactly what they're going for. It feels kind of like the quarterback purgatory that Denver's been in since Peyton Manning left. And that happens when you went from Andrew Luck. Anything that you went to was going to be a step back. And I feel like they're throwing a lot of things on the wall. Maybe if they're on that Broncos track, maybe Teddy Bridgewater is the next thing they throw against the wall.
Yikes.
Hey, it could happen. Well, the third blockbuster trade Thursday, Khalil Mack, the defender from Chicago, is going to the Chargers. They're working on finalizing that deal. Rumored compensation is a second-round pick in the 2022 draft and a sixth-round pick in the 2023 draft, which is quite a fall-off from when Chicago paid, I believe, 2 first-round picks or 3 first-round picks to get Mack from the Raiders a couple of years ago. Now Cleo Mack going back to the AFC West paired with Joey Bosa. Defense, especially stopping the run and up front and getting pressure, seemed to be an issue for the Chargers at times down the stretch, arguably cost them a chance to get into the playoffs. What do you think of this move?
I just think it's a signal of how difficult that division's going to be. They're almost a reaction to the Russell Wilson move, which is, kind of funny to bring back to Russell Wilson. A lot of commentary is along the lines of, why are you bringing in, this veteran quarterback to Denver only to have to face Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert for the rest of their careers in what seems like an uphill battle. And, from my perspective is what are you just going to sit out 10 years and not try to win? Your team is excellent. You might as well put the pieces in place when you have the opportunity. There's no reason a Russell Wilson, a Justin Herbert has a shot to take off, on a tremendous season and overcome what the Chiefs have presented the last few years. So I think, the Chargers are making some great moves to put them in position to contend. Yeah,
and arguably their biggest move of the week was re-signing Mike Williams. 3 years, $60 million, keeps him locked up alongside Keenan Allen for Justin Herbert out there on offense. After he re-signed and guaranteed with the Chargers, I moved him from a low-end wide receiver 3 up to a high-end wide receiver 3. I think I currently have him sitting at wide receiver 25. I feel like Keenan Allen is still their number 1, but I liked what Williams did. Had a career year last year. As long as he can stay healthy, I think they're in a good spot. What did you think of that signing?
I think it just continues the rapport that was clearly developed between he and Herbert. The more you can keep, in my opinion, pass catchers with the same offense, probably the more beneficial as far as the cohesion and maintaining the performance.
The final big piece of news was a defensive signing. The Tennessee Titans re-upped outside linebacker Harold Landry, 5 years, $87.5 million. Ricky was not a fan of the deal. It does feel like a lot for a guy that has 31 career sacks in 4 years. He's coming off a career year with 12. The Titans defense is probably not the best part of their team. Seems like a lot to splash out. What did you think of that one?
I honestly have not a lot of opinion on some of these defensive signings as more of a fantasy analyst, if you would like to give me that privilege. But if Ricky's against it, then I stand behind Ricky 1,000%.
I think Ricky's just against the Titans most of the time in general. But the other big piece of news is Tuesday was the franchise tag deadline. We now know there were 8 players that received the franchise tag. I'm going to tick them all off, and then, Jason, you can tell me which 1 or 2 maybe were surprises for you. Wide receivers, Davante Adams tagged by the Packers, Chris Godwin tagged by the Buccaneers, 3 tight ends, Dalton Schultz tagged by the Cowboys, Mike Gaseki by the Dolphins, and David Njoku tagged by the Browns. Offensive tackles, Cam Robinson tagged by the Jaguars and Orlando Brown tagged by the Chiefs. And safety Jesse Bates III was tagged by the defending AFC champion Cincinnati Bengals. Any of those surprises? Any moves you like there?
I would say that the most alarming would probably be the David Njoku tag. I mean, what are you going to do with all of these tight ends that you don't use offensively?
Meanwhile, they're trying to trade Jarvis Landry and they let OBJ go. They're going to go back to the wishbone. I think we've seen Nick Chubb is the only part.
Yeah. I mean, you can split out Kareem Hunt, get a little bit more 2-back sets.
They're talking about moving on from Hunt, too. It might just be Chubb and the tight ends. That Austin Hooper deal looks worse every day that goes by. The other surprising tag for me was Mike Gesicki, not because I don't believe in the talent, but because it seemed like Miami had lukewarm feelings toward him at best. So I was mildly surprised that they see him as an important part of their team. I guess maybe it was Brian Flores had lukewarm feelings, but their new head coach was the offensive coordinator in San Francisco, where they definitely found a way to use George Kittle. So maybe that means good things for Mike Gesicki.
Doesn't that bury one of your sleepers for another year?
Hunter Long? Well, it makes that Hunter Long draft pick is even more curious now. I thought maybe they were grooming him, but or maybe they're going to. Maybe every team's going back to the wishbone. Let's be honest. The wishbone, underrated offense. Speaking of players that would probably benefit from the wishbone, today we are going to look at our top 10 Dynasty consensus ranks at running back. Same panel of 4 voted on these. There will be a written version of this coming up a little later. You'll be happy to know this week we actually have exactly 10. We still had 2 ties. There's a tie at 7 and a tie at 9 as we go down there. I think that shows a little bit how we're a little all over the board. There were 3 running backs that scored in the 30-point range that kind of distanced themselves from the rest. And then one in the at 20, and the rest were all kind of in the between 10 and 14, which kind of shows you the spread where we're going. But one who we had no trouble placing is Jonathan Taylor, who comes in at number 1. He got 3 first place votes, 39 total points. What do you like about Jonathan Taylor?
I mean, what's not to like? He's still very young. He has the explosion, and he's just getting almost all of the volume now. It actually, speaking of curious contracts, it makes the Nyheim Hines contract look very, very unorthodox now at this juncture.
Maybe he's playing wide receiver too. We don't know.
Or
maybe they're going back to the wishbone.
Yeah.
They're just going to do the 3.
I like it.
Yeah, the only concern I ever have about Jonathan Taylor is if Frank Reich remembers he's on the team and that he's supposed to get the ball. Number 2 coming in for us is Najee Harris, second-year guy, was the top running back drafted by the Steelers last year. He got John's first-place vote. He was second for me and Ricky. You were a little bit lower, putting him 4th. Trepidations about Harris or the offense?
More trepidation about Harris. If you can be trepidatious having a running back ranked number 4 and seeing that as a negative. My focus at running back, especially in Dynasty, you want to really, I suppose, I'm trying to figure out how to work age into this as well. But just in general, volume is king. High value touches, specifically pass catching, is my second priority. And then if we're breaking ties, you want kind of big play upside. For years, much like yourself, of dealing with Le'Veon Bell, you got all the volume, you got all the pass catching. You never saw a play more than 25 yards. So, for example, like a Jonathan Taylor, you definitely were getting the potential for a 60-yard touchdown on almost any given play. Najee Harris, to me, fits a bit more of that Le'Veon Bell role where he might break some tackles, but he's probably getting tackled immediately after. And he's not really going to stretch the field, but he certainly has the pass catching upside. And he's shown that he's going to get 90% of the Steelers' touches from the backfield. And that's worth a lot. I mean, I certainly can scratch my head a little bit having him behind someone like Swift, who still seems to be mired in a bit of a backfield with Jamal Williams, and Javonte Williams, who I seem to be standing for extremely hard. I guess that's more of a perpetual hope that Melvin Gordon just kind of fades off into the sunset and Javonte Williams gets the entire role.
Yeah, so I will say Harris's long last year was 37. He also got 307 carries, which is more than Bell got in 4 of his 5 seasons. So that is on the positive note. Le'Veon Bell was a little more explosive than I think you remember. In his 5 years in Pittsburgh, his long rush was 43 as a rookie, 81 in his second year, 42 in 2015, 44 in 2016, and 27 in his last year, 2017. So he never had a year where it was only 25, and he had in all the years pass plays over 40 yards as well. I think he was a little more explosive probably than what we saw from Harris last year, but I'm going to give the caveat that I love what he's done, and it would be hard to have a worse offensive line quarterback combination in 2022 than what he had in 2021. All apologies to Ben Roethlisberger, who had a fantastic career. He was not the same guy last year, and their ability to challenge vertically wasn't the same. When you combine that with a subpar offensive line, I think it's actually was a miracle to me that Harris did as well as he did, without a lot of holes, without a lot of soft defensive coverages. So I'm curious to see what he does. But there is always that risk. Steelers, one of the teams with an offense maybe a little bit in flux. The number 3 consensus for us, you had him as your number 2. The rest of us all had him at number 3. 33 overall points is Deandre Swift. I'm going to start. I'll say my only hesitation with Swift is not really the timeshare. It's him being able to stay on the field, because we've seen him miss time each of the first 2 years, but he's such a dynamic weapon and a threat in both places. He and TJ Hawkinson and Amon St. Brown seem to be giving Detroit this kind of awesome core of young players for Jared Goff.
Of course. Yeah, I get the same sense. I think I feel like he has a little bit higher ceiling, and staying on the field, for me, it doesn't, we've seen him miss time, but at the running back position, I don't feel like that's really different from anybody else. They just happen to stay healthy for an entire season. I think at the position, you're really shooting in regards to the long term. You're trying to get some of these high valued running backs just for their 1 season or 2 seasons where they finish as a top 3 back, or essentially are a league winning type of back, and see if you can capitalize on that in the time. So it's a matter of how many seasons can you possibly get out of a player where you have that opportunity. And that's why I think I favor the Swift and Javonte Williams slightly over Najee Harris, who is an older rookie coming out of college, whereas Swift and Javonte were closer, I believe, in the 20 and 21-year-old range coming out of college.
Yeah. So after those kind of top 3, there was a pretty big fall off in the way that we had our ranks. Coming in number 4, but only 20 points, is Christian McCaffrey. And we were a little bit split. If you would have done this at this time last year, he probably was still a consensus number 1. But he has only appeared in 10 games the last 2 years. So durability a question. Nobody knows what Carolina's doing on offense. We talked about not having a quarterback. They may have less than no quarterback unless they can make some kind of a big move. What are you feeling about Christian McCaffrey now?
You're getting into that scared twilight of the running back age, but for the most part, he still presents the highest upside of all the players at the position. So where we're looking for that one pivotal season, the CMC still, every time we've seen him on the field, he appears to have it. So it's just baking in that risk that maybe you have 2 more opportunities for seasons where he could potentially hit that legendary threshold of, over 22, 25 fantasy points per game.
And much like Beetlejuice, you say his name enough and he appears. And Ricky obviously felt the siren call of us talking about his love for Ryan Tannehill.
Is that what it was? Can you guys see me?
No, I think your camera's off. That's why I was sure if you were ready.
I don't understand what's going on either. I don't really know what's going on. It shows my camera's on, but I don't even know. I just came in here to bug you guys for a minute. I'm in the middle of doing like 5,000 things at one time. But
you sound great. If that helps.
Thanks, buddy. I appreciate that.
No problem.
Yeah, no. I just came in to say that anything these guys have said for the last 32 minutes and 50 seconds is completely wrong. And I'm kidding. I love you guys. Yeah, it's been an interesting week of football. I'm sure you guys tackled a lot of what has kind of happened. I look forward to free agency next week. I look forward to us rediscussing all of our rankings after free agency really just throws us all for a damn loop. You know what I mean? Like, because Fox and I were talking about it. I'm like, you have a week like we had, and it's not even free agency yet, right? You know what I mean? It's not even free agency yet. McCaffrey could be on the move. Barkley could be on the move. We can see a lot of shifting pieces that really just make us go, what is going on? And it's really fun so when Fox yells at you and says, give me your rankings now or you're fired, and that's what he did to me. And when he does something like that, you have to, really kind of bucker up and get him going. And it was like, I don't know about y'all guys, and I heard you touching on a little bit, but running backs is ugly. Like, it's just ugly anymore. Like, I don't know if I would draft if I'm in a dynasty league. I don't know if I really care about running back that much. Like, it's like, is it worth it to have a guy for 2-3 years? I don't even know anymore. And a lot of these guys are going to the 2-back system, and it's like, make sure you start the right one that week. And it's like, it's really murky up there in Green Bay, especially with Aaron Jones. And he's one I really struggled with because I love Aaron Jones. I love what he's able to do, and I love what he's capable of doing. But A.J. Dillon's not going anywhere, and that's terrifying. You know what I mean? And he's thoroughly scary in that backfield. And you're right about McCaffrey. You hit the nail on the head. It's like, when that guy's healthy, I don't know if there's a better running back in football. You know, especially in fantasy, that is. You know what I mean? I don't know if there's a better running back in football. Same can be said for Kamara as well. So, yeah, I look forward to the free agency because I really feel like we're going to see a lot of dominoes fall into place, especially when it comes to the running back position. So, I really look forward to my top 10 that are my top 10 right now to be completely different in a week. And really, I'm going to probably, like, I don't remember where I had Javonte at, but I really look forward to having him move completely off my rankings when Melvin Gordon signs back. So now that I'm probably going to be kicked off the show, it's been real, guys.
I'm worried about Melvin Gordon, too. I also saw some Denver Broncos fans saying, well, we should re-sign Teddy Bridgewater anyway. And I was like, I might have to quit the Denver Bronco fan groups on Facebook.
Did I miss the victory lap of the Russell Wilson trade in here? I must have, right? I must have.
Yeah, that was right up at the top. Well, you're looking – so that'd be a good question for you. Jason and I were the only two of our panel that actually had Wilson ranked top 10 when we did quarterback consensus ranks last week. So I had him at 8 already. He didn't move for me. I don't really think he moved for Jason, but did he move for you?
He moves a little bit, yeah. I need to see how the rest of the offseason plays out for the Broncos. I really feel like they need to really kind of identify themselves. I mean, obviously, it's a stock up on Sutton and Judy. I think that having Jerry Judy, who I think is one of the best wide receiver prospects to come out in the last couple of years, to have him have a quarterback, obviously he's going to have to work on those drops because they're terrible. And maybe his demeanor will be a little bit better. His attitude was a little piss poor, and Fox and I talked about that. And I know that's one of Fox's frustrations with Judy all through last season. He kind of had that demeanor when he was on the football field. You knew he wasn't going to get the ball because of how he acted when he jumped off the line. So hopefully that kind of improves a little bit. We saw with his tweets. One tweet was, whenever Rodgers signed back, and then 3 hours later Russell Wilson's coming to town. I still think Wilson has a lot in the tank, and I didn't think I had him in my top 10 because if he was going to stay in Seattle, that's team's just always in purgatory, and they're not willing to. They've never really been willing to highlight what Wilson is good at, and how they've kind of really taken away the run from him. He's very good on his legs, and that's one thing that has been completely wiped away in his last couple of years as quarterback for Seattle. Is he's able to make plays on his feet, and I hope to see more of that because if you have good route runners in Sutton and Judy, they can get away from, and he obviously already has an upgrade behind the offensive line. I'd like to see the Broncos move a little bit more, try to get a little bit more certainty behind that front five. But if Wilson's good at escaping the pocket, I think people forget how good Wilson is because he kind of got lost in there. But we've seen flashes of Wilson over the last couple of years. I do think that personally, I feel like he can finish easily in the top 5 at the end of this year. You know what I mean? If everything goes according to plan, which it could, you know what I'm saying? Like, this is a good team, and you're playing in a division where there's going to be a lot of fireworks. You know what I mean? It's going to be a lot of fireworks. And, of course, the Chargers made a move to really kind of hone in on that pass rush, which was brilliant move. I think it was a steal, especially considering the Bears are paying a lot of that contract in the first year. Like, I mean, that's just absurd. And thinking about having Mack and Bosa on the defensive line chasing you down is just terrifying. I mean, but when it comes down to it, I still think you got a shootout between all those teams. You know what I mean? I still think that I don't think the Broncos are, in my opinion, the Broncos are still third in my opinion, because I need to see what Wilson can do in that offense. But this early in the offseason, he's going to have a lot of time. So if those receivers get with him, I think that we could see a really good team. And honestly, I could see all 3 teams making the playoffs. I really do. This is just – I was listening to the Titans schedule this morning, and they play the West this year. And I'm like, they might go 0-4 against just the West alone. But you don't have to win. And the crazy thing, everybody's like, well, they're not going to win the West. You don't have to win the West, right? You would like to, for sure. but you have three wild card spots that are wide open, and we've seen these lower seeds make it to the championship. You know what I mean? It's been done. So, these teams are going to beat up on each other all year, perceivably so. But as I mentioned in my tweet, Fox and I literally talked about this a week or 2 weeks ago, maybe, when we were talking about the Broncos. They lost like 5 one-loss game or one score games.
Yeah, 1 for games.
And on top of that, they were 1-5 in division. So if you get 3 more wins out of Wilson, you're a 10-7 team. You're a wild card team, period. And then you kind of, when the playoffs happen, you are a brand new team. So
what's going to be interesting is the NFC West and the AFC West play each other this year, which are arguably the 2 strongest divisions, top to bottom. That could have huge impacts on both wildcard fields.
Yeah, and again, I'm out of here, guys. Thank you for letting me come in and crash the party. Also, real quick, I'm going to be on record, as everybody knows, that I love Joe Burrow, but I'm on record now. I think that, and I'm going to record this from 12 Central Time on whatever day today is, that the Bengals are going to miss the playoffs next year. So book it. It's going to happen. And Joe Burrow will never be back in the Super Bowl again. I love Joe Burrow, and I would love to see that man win a Super Bowl. But the AFC is just too good. And think about that Chargers front 4 playing Joe Burrow in the playoffs, and think again. Like, you're just going to die.
They've got to get some line. You may have cost yourself Skyline Chili, but I've seen Skyline Chili, so maybe that's not a loss.
Yeah, it's not good. So sorry. I'm going to go before anybody else, I get death threats or anything like that. But thank you, Jason, for stepping in for me this week. Matt, thanks for taking charge. And I promise I'll be back sooner than everybody thinks that.
Yes, Wednesday.
Yes, we got the big free agency, which basically everybody will probably already be signed that needs to be signed. So, it'll be just us recapping all of the temporary period where everybody, I'm not talking to this guy. So, yeah. Jason, your lighting's really good, man. I need to get with you on your lighting. So, all right, I'm out, guys.
Thanks, man. Take care, Ricky. Thank you.
I think Ricky just needed some lighting.
Oh, it was great to have Ricky drop in and bring some noise to the show. It's fantastic.
Well, we're going to go back to consensus ranks. We're kind of in the middle. Number 5 for us, 14 points, Dalvin Cook. I had him 4. Ricky had him 5. You had him 10. John didn't even rank him. What scares you about Dalvin Cook?
This is a curious one for me because he's definitely demonstrated his talent for scoring lots of fantasy points. I guess there's a little bit of the legal rumblings that have been going on for the past year, and is advanced. Let's not say advanced like he's old, considering how old we are, and being a 26, 27-year-old would be a real fountain of youth type of thing at this point in our lives. But I'm putting him in a category where I've got McCaffrey, Barkley, and Cook as kind of the true veteran backs that are still top 10. Top 10 in my rankings. I feel like there's just a little bit more risk in his profile and in some of the, I guess, I can't really bring up much of an argument outside of the legal issues at this point. Otherwise, I'm just taking some players that seem to be in more hospitable situations.
Yeah, and I think some people get worried about the injury risk, but I feel like that's been a little overblown. He has missed some games. I think it's hard. I spaced out for a minute.
Oh, that's all good.
If you can get them to play, it's good. I guess I do have some questions about Minnesota's offense, and I wonder what's going to change with the new coaching regime. But it probably just speaks to running back. Running back is a tough nut to crack. Next on our list is Antonio Gibson. He is entering his third year, was a wide receiver in college, which probably caused some people to not know if he could be a guy to carry the load. He frequently went the end of second or even in the third round of rookie drafts. And all he's done is have back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. That being said, only three of us ranked Antonio Gibson. I was not one of them. John had him fifth. Ricky had him sixth. You had him ninth. I did not rank him. I still like Antonio Gibson. For me, he was right at number 13, so just a little bit outside my top 12. I still like him. I think he's good. I am very happy with the shares I have, especially where I got him in a lot of those rookie drafts. But I'm not as high on his upside as some others, and maybe that's me not being as high on Washington's upside as some others.
I think you sum it up pretty well. He's clearly getting, the volume, and it looks like they're more willing to give him some looks in the passing game despite J.D. McKissick. And for me, you pretty much said it. I don't think he's getting that RB1 season overall anytime, and that's kind of what keeps him from being much higher on the board for me, although 9 is pretty high, and that speaks to him just going into year 3, really, for me, and the workload. So.
Yeah, he's definitely a good back, and like I said, he was a super value if you picked him up in rookie drafts. Less of a value now because I have seen him go up in that top 10, which is maybe why I steer a little further away from him in startups. Next at 7, we actually have our first tie. So we have a veteran in Austin Eckler and the rookie Javonte Williams, each of them getting 12 points. It's kind of a tale of two players. We'll start with Eckler. All of us had Eckler ranked somewhere. The highest that he was ranked was 7th. Lowest he was ranked was 9th by Ricky. What do you think about Austin Eckler? Obviously, a pretty solid offense there with the Chargers.
Yeah, and I guess I would have to, excuse myself for not including him with Barkley and Cook at this point as an older back who's clearly demonstrated he can really perform. I've been surprised that they've used him as much as they have with the volume. We clearly understand his pass catching upside and his burst ability. I think he was hindered a bit with nagging injuries down the stretch, and so we saw some other exposure to, say, Justin Jackson. But I think he still has that opportunity for an elite, top 3 overall season, more to the degree of say a Dalvin Cook, and for me Barkley more so than a Gibson, and that's why he came in at 7 for me. Which, I mean, if you're arguing between 7, 8, 9, and 10, I'm not going to say, you're wrong for having Mixon over him, or, even if you wanted to go Gibson or Dalvin Cook, it's splitting hairs for me, really, at the position. Like Ricky said, it's very much a swamp, if you will, in that later RB rankings.
Yeah, and I love the offense. I love the production. He had career highs in rushing carries, rushing yards, and rushing touchdowns last year. I think he's about as rock solid as you can get in that situation. Doesn't have a lot of competition for touches. On the flip side, we have Javonte Williams, who was the second best running back off the board in the rookie drafts last year. You actually have him ranked one spot ahead of Najee Harris. You and I were the only ones that ranked him. You had him 3rd. I had him 7th. I love Javonte Williams. My only hesitation, I will say, is I'm worried if they let him have the full workload, which we saw several times down the stretch, he could be a beast. He could be easily a top 3 fantasy scorer. I worry if they sign somebody, God forbid they bring back Melvin Gordon. But how do you feel about Javonte?
I think he could easily be the most. Let's say I don't see him being any different from Jonathan Taylor from a skill perspective. If the situation changes, he can easily be the number one overall running back, midway through the season if he has all of the volume, in my opinion. So it's definitely a bit of wish casting on my end, I guess, hoping for Melvin Gordon to move on to a different team.
From your lips to God's ears. But I agree. I love Javonte Williams' power. He was a good receiver. I guess the only question is Denver's coaches.
Yeah. I mean, I like the youth too compared to all these other backs. I'd rather roster him ahead of them, knowing he's got several years ahead to give me the opportunity to hit a home run.
Yeah. So our last two guys also ended up in a tie at 9 with 10 points. Nick Chubb of the Browns and Joe Mixon of the Bengals. So we'll start with Chubb, probably one of the best pure runners. He's not usually a huge receiving threat, but in that system, he seems to get consistent volume, and that's been enough even in the PPR scoring that I think most people play and that I know I play in for him to be a top 10 option. What do you like about Chubb?
Chubb for me is like a unicorn of rushing efficiency, which I don't think you can really find almost anywhere. And the question is whether it's strictly the Browns' situation, their offensive line, the way their scheme is set up. Clearly, they don't do anything very well in the passing game, so it's fortunate that the running game is pretty remarkable. But yeah, just the lack of receptions for Chubb really limits his ceiling for me. That's why I didn't have him in the top 10. But I think he's a steady producer, and you can probably find some great values with him.
Yeah, and no one benefited more from the fact that the Browns are going all in on the tight end position than Nick Chubb. They won't have a Landry or a Beckham. They've got Njoku, Harrison Bryant, and Austin Hooper, so they're going to be power eye all the time.
Yep.
On the flip side, Mixon is a guy that was in all 4 of our ranks. I had him at 10, so did Ricky. You had him at 8. John had him all the way up at 6. What do you think about Mixon?
I had never been very high on Mixon, and that could just be a view on Cincinnati in general leading up to the season. This is more of an acknowledgement that he's getting the workload, he's getting the receptions. After him, you're starting to get questions in that department at other running backs throughout the league. And I happen to enjoy the Joe Burrow situation, despite Ricky's hesitancy over the Bengals next season. Mixon for me is more of a safety play at the position. I think he represents a modicum of upside, but I'm just not excited about him, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and he has dual threat ability, but obviously Cincinnati has a plethora of pass catching weapons, so I don't think he's high up there on the target charts. But for me, no one would benefit more from a offensive line upgrade in Cincinnati than Mixon. The same things that hold back Burrow. I don't think Mixon's run behind a good offensive line at any point in his career, and he still managed to produce mostly. So I think it's the volume and the position that puts him in there, but I have him a little bit lower. As I said, he was 10 for me because I don't see quite as much upside as some of the other guys potentially there. So that is our top 10. But before we move away from running backs, who's one guy that didn't make the consensus top 10 that you think should be in there?
Well, looking back at my rankings, I had Saquon Barkley as the 6th running back in my rankings. I think I explained a lot of my opinion on the veteran backs that have a chance to still produce the elite season. Barkley, provided he's in his current situation with the Giants, sure, there's trepidation over his usage last year and just very poor performance. But I can, spin a narrative to describe that away, which has almost no fact basis behind it. But I still think he's going to get that significant volume, and we've seen that some pretty dramatic performance from him over the years, and I'd rather gamble on him among some of these other backs to swing for the fence.
Yeah, and that's a pretty good call. I have Barkley just outside my top 10. I actually think he might be a guy that I would move up if I thought he was going to move away from the Giants. I like Brian Daboll, but one thing you would say about Buffalo is we never really saw a great and consistent running game, unless you're talking about Josh Allen. Maybe that's the talent they have. Maybe it's a little bit of the scheme. I still have questions. Do the Giants even have an offensive line? So Barkley was probably a generational talent that may have gotten wasted because of the team and position that drafted him. For me, the one that I have also is my number 6 back. There was something about you and I with our 6th place position that nobody else could get on the bus, is Alvin Kamara. Kamara has been rock solid for PPR, very consistent with getting targets. He's probably the star on the New Orleans offense, but I get the big hesitation is probably the legal issue, which is hanging over him. And we have seen that, this time last year, there were probably a lot of people that still had Deshaun Watson in their top 5 and then ended up having to see him not be available for a year. That's definitely a concern. It's something that bears watching, but from a talent standpoint, I just think Kamara, we saw him do it last year with functionally no quarterback back there and no receiving game whatsoever. And he, I just like the talent and the production. Maybe the scheme changes. I think that could be scaring some people off. But until I see that he can't do it, he's going to be up there for me as long as he's available.
I think you make an excellent point. I was discussing an acquaintance of mine on Twitter. We're discussing in the DMs. Connor LaPlante was doing work with, I guess it would be a fantasy football war, wins above replacement. And Alvin Kamara has 3 seasons where he was over 2.2 wins above replacement at the position. And that's kind of a threshold where, for example, in the past, I believe it was the past 10 years, only around 37 players reached that threshold, which means you're only getting a couple of those in a single season. Maybe 2.5. So that's pretty remarkable given that he's always had to cede a few touches to another back for the most part during his tenure. So it's really just the legal issues for me. You make a great point. He's just as talented as any of those 25, 26-year-old backs, barring maybe McCaffrey. We can just consider he gets the complete volume. But I think that's, I'd really, I guess for me, I have Dalvin Cook at 10. I could easily interchange Kamara there. They feel like the similar situations, different skill sets.
Yeah. And it's going to be curious. I mean, there's a few players that we're watching this offseason to see where they go. Well, that's going to do it for the NFL portion. I will hit Movie Corner briefly here at the end. Jason, this is your week because this is the movie weekend for streamers. There are no big theatrical releases. If you haven't seen The Batman, people have stayed away from it. It is still the predominant theater movie, but it's all about streaming service films. So I'm going to highlight, there are 3 that I think are worth checking out. One from last week is the documentary Lucy and Desi. It was directed by Amy Poehler. It premiered at Sundance. It's on Amazon Prime. It is a beautiful documentary about Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz, their kind of life, career, and relationship together. I thought it was very moving. I have it up in my top 10. I thought it's the best documentary I've seen so far this year. Definitely worth checking out, learning more about their life. But the 2 big releases this week are actually actually both streaming releases. Disney saw that a Pixar movie was ready to release and said no to theaters yet again, and put it out on Disney Plus, not even on premium Disney Plus. It's just regular Disney Plus, and that is Turning Red. I watched that this morning. I thought it was cute, very kind of beautifully drawn, nice addition to the Pixar library. Ricky gave it, I think, 3.5 stars. I gave it 3 stars. That is going to be one of the movies covered on the Banana Meter this week. The other one on the Banana Meter this week is The Adam Project, which is on Netflix. It has Ryan Reynolds in it. I have not quite seen that one yet, but Ricky saw it and has it up in his top 10. He loved it. You can look for his review. That's going to be our other Banana Meter movie. So, Jason, they're looking out for you, somebody who wants to be able to kick back and watch a film at home since you have young children. Almost every streaming site has one for you this week.
Fantastic. Actually, I'm looking forward today. I think it's the last 2 episodes of Marvelous Mrs. Maisel should be up on Amazon Prime. So hopefully
indeed,
this weekend.
Yes. My wife and I are also enjoying that one. I'm kind of bummed it's only an 8-episode season, but you take what you can get. Yeah. Great minds think alike. Well, next week, Ricky and I will be doing a free agency show on Wednesday, but on Friday we will be back looking at wide receiver dynasty consensus ranks. Members of the panel will be in, and that will be my last day in Colorado before I experience that fresh Nevada air that Jason's been drinking in. But until then, where can people find you?
At Asterita Jason on Twitter. That's the only place you're going to find me unless you're checking out some work on Music City Drive-In.
And I'm at Nighthawk7734. Just keep looking out. We've been posting stories about all of the moves that are happening. I'm sure there is going to be a million moves more to cover starting Monday. Actually,
Matt, real quick, did you have any opinion on the Calvin Ridley suspension?
Boy, that's such a bummer. Yeah, I forgot that was this week. It's been such a week. That was Monday, I think.
Yeah, imagine all the news that had to come out in order to squash that topic.
Yeah, it's a real bummer. Gambling in sports is a real red flag. It's been the uncrossable line, not just for the NFL, but for all sports for many, many years. So it makes sense to me based on the integrity of the game. And we're not talking about the integrity of the people that play the game. I know there's been a lot of comparisons between that and people who have committed domestic violence or other heinous acts. And those are problems that probably should be taken more seriously. But all professional sports have always had kind of a hard red line about things that cause perceptions of possibly inequity in playing games, because almost all of these sports rely heavily on fan interest, and gambling's always been a big part of that. It's ironic. Everybody, the sports need gambling to survive, but the players are not to do gambling, or they can't be a part of it. It's a real bummer. I hope that we see Calvin Ridley again. For those of us that rode out a really rough, starting 2021, I thought he could be the wide receiver 1 overall in fantasy. And to go from that to we hope we see him in 2023 and we have no idea where he's going to play is a little bit rough. But how did that kind of a bummer for you too?
Yeah. First, you were very eloquent in your summation of the whole situation, particularly with the inequities involved. I guess this, for me, it felt like this was their opportunity to set a precedent now that gambling is more pervasive throughout the United States. And taking the hard line now eliminates problems with, the future. Whereas, and this is, you can't compare the acts of domestic violence versus gambling. They're completely separate entities there. But as far as precedents in domestic violence, unfortunately, we have years of labor relations between the NFLPA and the league where they already have, unfortunately, punishments that have been in place that kind of set a standard that they have to build on. And again, in the NFLPA is still going to side to try and help players. And so they can always look back at these, if you want to call them earlier previous punishments that admittedly were not severe enough looking back. And so you're kind of have to slowly, incrementally increase those, whereas in this situation, they had the opportunity to just get it right the first time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like you said, in a lot of these other situations, almost immediately when a punishment comes down, there's talk there's going to be an appeal. They'll settle at a lower number. I haven't heard any of that in a week with Calvin Ridley. So I would, if you're a fantasy player, especially a dynasty player, I have a couple shares myself. This is the absolute worst time to try to trade him. I would try to ride it out and have him on your bench. I've seen some horrendous offers come through for Ridley, like trying to offer you a 3rd round pick in this draft or a 4th round pick in this draft. It's not worth it. It would be better to take the gamble that you're going to get Calvin Ridley back in 2023 than to take the gamble, in my opinion, on a 3rd or 4th round pick.
Yeah, and that's not to say that Calvin Ridley couldn't gamble on anything, just not the NFL. There's lots of other sports going on that he has the opportunity to gamble on. So,
yeah, sad story all the way around. Hopefully he will get back on there. But that will definitely be one that probably impacted our wide receiver ranks that we'll be looking at next week. I had him on the cusp still of top 12, and I have definitely dropped him down quite a ways. So, and that's when we get into wide receiver and tight end, we'll probably see a little more scoring shakeups based on the trades we've seen, and possibly on some of the signings that we get. Some marquee guys are out there, could end up in some good locations. So I'll be curious to see how things shake out when we get to next Friday. But for now, have a great weekend.
Take care.